Hello, I'm Brian Costello, and welcome to the Teacher's Journey podcast, where we talk with some of the best educators around about learning and life as they share the stories that made them the educators they are today. And welcome back, everyone, to the Teacher's Journey podcast. It is my pleasure this evening to be joined by Joy Kirr, 7th grade English language arts teacher from Arlington Heights, Illinois, and the author of the book Shift This. So Joy is here tonight to share a little bit of her journey with us, and I've had the opportunity to interact with Joy and get to know her a little bit through social media over the past few years. And it's my absolute pleasure to be speaking with her tonight about this, because she has been an inspiration to me in terms of my learning, my journey, and she'll probably play that down a little bit. But at the same time, I definitely appreciate things that I've learned from working and talking with her. So thanks, Joy, for joining me tonight.
Hello there, Brian. I will play it down because everybody makes us who we are.
Of course, and that is one of the wonderful points that I can't wait to find out more about is the who you are and how you kind of gotten here to this point in your career, in your journey in life. But at some point, it had to start out. So, when or how did you realize that you were going to be in education? You're going to be a teacher.
You know, I think of this all the time because people are like, why did you become an educator? And I don't really know. So I learned sign language in high school. I went to our local community college and I learned sign language and I watched it on TV and I'm like, this is great. This is great. And my mom said, okay, for college, you can either go to the local community college and get a car or go to Northern, which was an hour away, and not have a car. And I'm like, I'm leaving. So it's an hour away. That's great. And I'm like, what am I going to do there? So I went to some fair there, and somewhere along the line, someone said something about deaf education. I'm like, well, what's that? Okay, you get to teach deaf kids. I'm like, well, I couldn't train dogs for the deaf because it was all volunteer work. So I said, sure, I'll try it. And the lady there said, you know, it's a 5-year program. You don't want to do it. And I'm like, well, forget that. I'm going to make it in 4. So I did. And thank goodness I did, because I think my sophomore year I had one of those clinical classes, you know, where I was finally with some kids, and it was middle school, multi-handicapped deaf. And I walked in there and I was scared to death. I'm like, you know, what am I doing here? Why am I here? And the kids walked in. I'm like, this is it. This is what I need to be doing. And I was so like relieved, like, oh, I made the right decision, you know? So that's where I started. And Northern was great to me. They have great floors that you can talk with people. Like the third floor of the Grant Towers, if you've ever been there, is just for deaf and hard of hearing kids and for people interested in working with deaf and hard of hearing. So you're immersed in the culture, bam, right there. So I did that for 3 years. And then I got out in 4 because I busted my butt, not like in high school, and I took it easy. And then I taught deaf and hard of hearing for 7 years. And it was 5 years as an itinerant teacher where I drove my little truck around to the different schools in McHenry County out here. And then 2 years at a Montessori school. And I had ages like 3 to 12 there. And we used cued speech instead of sign language. And it was really different. So all my kids, though, all of them in the 7 years had trouble with reading. You know, if you imagine it, deaf kids don't get their language till they're about 3 when they get a cochlear implant or a hearing aid. And so I went for my master's in reading, and my job at the time paid for that, which was great. Yes. So I got that. Yeah, I got that.
A bonus, yeah.
That is a total. I mean, you have to go for it when they're paying for it. So I got my reading specialist degree, and we were moving a little further east. My husband at the time and I were moving further back towards Chicago area. And so I said, well, I'll just look around for a job. And I swear, like, this job landed in my lap. I mean, I'm so very grateful. I don't know how it happened, but I got the reading specialist job where I am now at Thomas Middle. And I did that for 7 years. And so I realized just the other day that I haven't, you know, I go without grades right now till the end of the quarter, and the students and I figure out a grade at the end of the quarter. But those first 14 years of my teaching career, I never gave any grades because it was all based on goals. You know, my IEP goals and then my reading goals with the kids, and we never had grades. And I'm like, look at that. Look what I did. Like, I didn't even realize it.
Like, wait a minute. I've been
Yeah,
doing this. I've been like blazing the trail for years here.
yeah.
Look
How
at
did
look,
I not
people.
know this? Yeah. So then I became the department head while I was in the reading specialist position. And I remember we were all going to change curriculum. We were going to go to the block schedule. And I said, well, you should just do this. You should just do this. And this one lady in our department said, Joy, you don't know what's going on because you're not in the classroom. I'm like, yeah, you're right. So I went into the classroom. So I had an opportunity. Someone was leaving. So I went in there, and I've been in the classroom then since 2009, I believe. That's also when I went through like this huge transformation in my life. Like, first I go from not being in a classroom for 14 years to feeling like a first year teacher again. It was crazy. I mean, I was decorating the room. I was grading everything. It was just nuts.
So
And
let's slow this down a little bit because we just warp speeded through like 20
I
years.
go really fast.
So
Yeah.
no, which was great. No, but I wanna just rewind a little bit because we went from like, all right, I got this idea, let's just try it out, and you kind of threw something against the wall, and all of a sudden you got in classroom with kids, and that really does, I think, for people who love being in education, when you get into a classroom with kids and you start working in a school, you fall in love with the place where you're supposed to be. So what was it like? So your first year, I mean, you were driving around from building to building, school to school. You probably didn't have a lot of other people who did your job.
No, there were 5 of us.
Okay, so at least you had some. That's better than none. I thought maybe
We didn't
you
see
could have
them
done the
because
other
they all went to different schools, so I never saw them.
you never even saw them. So what was it like? I mean, you walk into a building for the first time, you walk in, you're the teacher, you're the person, you're an expert at this. Like your very first day you walk in the building, you know more than everybody else who is in the building probably about what you're about to do. And at the same time, you probably felt like you had no idea what to do. So what was that like? How did you get through? How did you
Oh my gosh.
navigate
Brian,
that?
it was crazy. Now you're bringing me back. You're bringing me way back, okay? And so this was 95, and I locked my keys in the car at the first school I went to. And not only that, the school wasn't open yet. So the district was open, but there was nobody at that school that day. So I couldn't even ask for help there. This was before cell phones. I was like, what am I going to do? So I had to walk a couple blocks to the gas station and call a locksmith. That was my very first day on the actual job as an itinerant teacher.
You got off to a great start.
And I didn't have a credit card. I just had a checkbook. And he's like, I guess I'll take the check because you don't have any cash. I'm like, no, I'm a
nothing.
person,
I haven't even got a paycheck yet. Like you'll be lucky if this doesn't bounce. Right?
Here's your $125 for opening my door because I'm an idiot. And then scheduling those kids. So, you have a week and you have to schedule a half an hour here, half an hour here, half an hour here. You can't really see them for more than half an hour because you're taking them out of the classroom. So scheduling was a nightmare because, you can't take my child during this time or this time or this time. Yeah, well, I have 7 schools to go to, and I have to count my drive time and all of that. Man, you are taking me back. I forgot all about that. And then once you get the schedule, you've got to make it on time. You have to track your miles. You have to make sure you don't speed. I got my first speeding ticket that first year. I ran over my first squirrel that first year, and I drove sleeping going into the parking lot my first year. That's the first time I fell asleep while sleeping. So while driving.
Wow.
So yeah, it was crazy time. And then, there'll be times at winter where they're in a concert, and so they have to rehearse for this concert. You go to see them, and they're not in their classroom. Well, where the heck are they? Okay, well, I get a half-hour nap because nobody told me that you were gone. So I'm taking my half-hour nap.
This is where I've got to be. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the icy roads, like it was crazy.
I talk about teaching, especially when you begin teaching, about how isolating it can be. And I can only imagine that for you in a position where you are the only one and you don't have anybody to really talk to. So you did that for 5 years, and really 7 years. I mean, so when you finally ended up in a classroom, so 14 years later, we'll fast forward back up close to the future.
Wait, you got to go back to that 5 years. Because you said like yeah, I couldn't even find rooms. Talk about isolation. Like you had to find a boiler room to work with your student because you couldn't work with them in their class because it's deaf and hard of hearing. Like you have all this background noise. You had to find a quiet place to work. So now where I am now, it's not my room anymore. That really festered. Like in those 5 years, I was like, those aren't your rooms. These are the kids' rooms. And so now that I have my own, it's not my own. It's
Yeah.
everybody's. So that made a huge difference.
And that's an interesting piece where you got, because that was one of those perspectives that I think one of the things you had said when I was first kind of making changes that was one of those things. It's not your room. It's our room. It's everyone's room.
Yeah.
It's there for the kids to learn in. And I think that's interesting where you pulled some of that perspective from that experience. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And so I know that there's like all kinds of things that go on in that whole time period. But when you walked in as a classroom teacher, you're now in your 14, 15 years into your career, and you're walking into a classroom as a classroom teacher for the first time. You're the department head and a first year teacher, basically.
Yeah.
How do you how did that go with your colleagues, with your kids, with yourself?
What's that song from? It's called "Try Anything" or "Try Everything" from one of those kids shows, the Zootopia, right? That's what I did. Like, okay, so I did have a coworker because since we went to the block, it was reading in LA separate, and now we were going together. So my coworker also did reading in LA block. So we were trying to plan together, and that was a good thing. But then the bad thing was that she was still doing things that had been done for the 15 years she had been there. And I was like, well, why are we doing this? And why are we doing this? And she didn't really like that. And I think it was 3 years after that, we both left the team. She went to do something else and I went to go to another team. And so we both had fresh starts then. But that's when I started asking questions like, why do we have to have this? And why do I have to grade all these grammar things? And why do we have a 50-point test for the outsiders? And why do they have to know what what so that had already been there was kind of like, wait a minute. So it was rough, but it was brand new and they knew I was going to fail and I was fine with it. And I learned that the kids would help me so much. They answered a lot of my questions.
Which is I think a perspective that is a lot easier to take as a veteran teacher moving into that position than as a first year teacher, like a real first year teacher walking in there being like, hey, I've got no idea what I'm doing. I'm here to stay.
Yeah.
So that's how you kind of got to the point where you're at right now. So one of the things that I do talk about is the need to give back. That and I said that education's given me a lot. The field, the community, the people in it have given me a lot. And I feel a need to do what I can, where I can, to give back to people in a way that can help others. And so you've transitioned in your career to a point where you are giving back, whether it be through your writing or through curating resources for people. What was that transition like? When did you start to move from I'm doing this for my kids in my school to make sure that my class is good to I actually have something to offer others?
It was when a mom got mad at me. It was my
moms have that effect.
Yeah. It wasn't even my mom. It was another mom. When we were doing Genius Hour and I hadn't told the parents anything about it. It was like my second or third year and it was just to myself. It was just us and we just did it on Mondays and that was just our thing. And one mom was mad at me for a lot of things, but on my 40th birthday, she called me out in front of the principal and said, you don't do this, you don't do this. I don't give worksheets and I don't do STEM flashcards and blah, blah, blah. And this Genius Hour thing is crazy. All the parents think so and you should do more PR. And so I went home and I cried and my husband's like, what are you going to do about it? And I said, okay, I'm going to do more PR. And so that's when the live binder came about. That's when the curating the resources came about. I was curating them for myself. I was keeping them all to myself. I'm like, okay, I need to organize this so other people can see it, so the parents can see it. And then once I started asking people on Twitter, like, what do you use for this? And what do you use for this? And what else can I add here? They started saying, hey, I need this. And I'm like, oh, teachers could use it. Like, I hadn't even thought of that, like, well, then I got to add this and this and this. And then it became an obsession. It wasn't like I have to do this. It was like, I really want to do this and I want to do it all the time. And I want to make it this grand thing. And then people were saying, I remember somebody was saying, you should charge for it. Cause I guess on the live binders, you can like have a subscription thing. I'm like, why the heck would I want to charge for it when these people need it? Like parents need it and the teachers are needing it. Like we have to do that. So I guess that's when I started. And that's when I felt like I do have something I could give to others. And it's just everything I've sucked up from other people. But now I just have to put it all together in a way that it makes sense to us. And I guess that was when I started saying, okay, I have something to share, and that was a little bit after I got on Twitter. And when you're on Twitter first and you're lurking and you're like, I don't have anything that anybody needs.
No, because I didn't understand Twitter when I first got on there. And so I was just talking.
Oh, were you?
People were talking back to me and I didn't know who any of them were. And all the, like, later on, I realized that these were all like the people who had already been like published and were like going places and speaking at big engagements. And I was just like, yeah, whatever. I don't know who they are. Like, they sound interesting. Let's talk. And then I was super naive and I was just like, oh, I mean, and I don't think that was a bad thing. Because my lack of understanding of what it all was, or even how it worked, to be honest, made me just like talk to people. But I do know that that's like the common way of you get on and you kind of look around and you see what's going on. And I was just kind of like, oh, hi.
Well, it took me a while to learn what a hashtag was.
Yeah, I didn't do that properly. No, I definitely didn't do it right for a while, but it didn't stop me from just randomly shouting things out into a void where I didn't have any followers, so no one was actually listening, but I was just shouting them out anyway. It's like, I'll just say things and see what happens.
That's great.
Yeah, it took me a while.
No, I didn't do that till I knew, no, I was quiet until I'm like, well, maybe people will want this and maybe they'll want that. And then once they started saying, wow, this is great, I'm like, well, okay, it's okay. I can keep sharing. And now I feel like I have to share something all the time. Like I feel like it's a duty or something, but I want to too. And the more I find, the more I want to share. And sometimes I feel like I'm sharing too much, but I know not everybody's going to see everything anyway. And if it's good enough, it'll come back around,
Oh yeah. And that's the great point too, is this stuff comes back around and, it's interesting how often you think people will see something that you posted and then so many people don't see the thing. And then I remember I learned that, I think last year I really learned that well when I was talking to somebody and they're like, I had no idea you wrote a book. And I'm like, yeah, I wrote 2. And they're like, 2 kids books. And I said, you didn't know? How did you not know that? Like,
I don't know.
It's the one thing that I like will auto tweet out there on a regular basis to tell people about because I just don't have the remembrance, I guess. I don't know, to remind myself to like put it out there. So I just automatically send it out like every 9 or 10 hours. It comes out there. And I was like, for a while at least. And I was just, and I'm like, how did that not get that? And I realized that people just don't see it all.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't.
It's funny how that works, but it's also, I mean, that's the nice thing about it is it will come back around. Those good things, good conversations, good information comes back around. Sometimes to the point where when you've been active in social media for a while, you start to see the same conversation enough times that you're not sure what to do with it next. But
or you see a quote that someone else said. You're like, oh, would you just cite it, please? Just say where you got it from, because I know I've seen that one before. It's like, oh.
Yeah. What's funny about some of those things is that, like, So I said I'll say something and someone's like, oh yeah, like that's not like I said in the here, and I'm like, oh yeah, you're right, it is. I've never read that before, and people are like, you never read that before? No, just
Yeah.
that's. But the thoughts come back around. A lot of the
Yeah.
thoughts,
Which is good. You know, the good ideas are getting out there.
and that's important, absolutely. So, and that's one of the things I really wanted to see is, how you push that out there. What made you decide to share? So kind of as a way to curate for your parents so that they knew, and also for yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way a lot of people get started in terms of getting their resources together for something that they care about or that they want to do. And then all of a sudden other people see those resources and say, wow,
And you
that's so
don't
useful.
know how many people it could impact. I mean, if there are people in Australia and Africa and stuff who use that darn live binder, and think of all the kids that they're interacting with, that they're affecting by trying Genius Hour. You know, like
Yeah, which
it
is amazing.
it
Yeah.
is just amazing, like mind blown how people could use just a snippet of it and bam, it affects so many kids. And then my hope is that the kids will go on to their next classes or their next grade and say, hey, can we do this? You know, I'd love it if they would advocate for themselves and say, we did this before and I really loved it. I did this. Can we do it again? So think of all those kids advocating for themselves and spreading it out to even more teachers. Ah!
And then typically the teachers come to my room and they say, what is wrong with you?
No, you got to teach the kids to not say your name. So this is
Oh,
what I did last year at the end of the year. I said, okay, so next year, if you want to do this, you can say, can we try this because this works for me because not because Mrs. Kirr did it, not because we did this last year, Mrs. Kirr's room. Don't say that. Say, I would love to try this because it helps me do this and this and this, and give them those words to advocate for themselves. So it's not like on you, it's on them.
that's important because there's nothing that will shut down that faster than we did it last year in this class. Can we do it in this
Right.
class too? No.
Right. No, if you already did it, you don't need to do it again. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you did a lot of things with Mr. Costello that you're not doing this year.
Yeah. No,
Oh,
not
all
this
right.
year.
But yeah, it's that's awesome. It's really cool that it just kind of took off, and you said that people see it all over the world, and the impact grows, and that's really.
And it's good to get that pushback from the parents too, because then that helped when I was going to no grades. I'm like, I'm starting a live binder before they even ask about it, and I'm just going to make sure that the information's there before they even start asking. So it's just good. It's just good habit to have your stuff public for other people to see and use.
Yeah. Uh, that's a good policy to have. Just have it there. Be transparent. Show parents what you're doing, so that when a kid gets hit with a UFO,
Yeah,
there's
you can tell them
no
why. Yeah.
there's not a huge surprise there.
Right.
Well, I didn't create a large enough testing space for this flying. It's just a
Right.
random flying saucer accident. It happens all the time.
Yeah. Go back to your why. Explain why you did it in the first place. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so one of the things you said kind of right at the beginning was, other people help make us who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've listened to kind of where you were at the beginning and how you got through to here. And I think because you spent all this time so isolated, even more so than I think your average teacher would be, because you were traveling from school to school, working all over the place, half an hour here, hiding in the boiler room.
Yeah.
How did you make connections early enough in your career that it was meaningful, useful to help you? Like, how did you find people to help you through things that were difficult, through things you didn't know how to navigate?
That's a great question because I'm not really sure. I know with my first 7 years with itinerant and the other school, I know who I didn't want to be. Like, I didn't want to be my boss, who I was soon going to be making more money than her because of my master's, and I don't want to be stuck in the same position being miserable. She was for vision and hearing, and she was miserable trying to handle it all. I didn't want to be some of the teachers that I saw at the Montessori school who only had this version of this is what deaf kids need. I didn't want to be, okay, I'm going to get a little personal here. I was married before I was Kirr, and it was he taught me to not trust. Like, he warned me to not trust others. And so I was isolated for a really long time. And in 2009, when I decided to go for that class, we were going through, it was 2009, 2010, we went through our divorce, and I got remarried in 2011. And Mr. Kirr, he taught me to trust again. And that being vulnerable again, it just opens you up. Like, I knew I was going to get hurt, and I have gotten hurt by trusting, but it's okay. It doesn't kill you. I think it's harder to not trust and stay isolated than to trust and be vulnerable and to really open up and let people see who you are and why you're doing things and ask for help. You know, people want to help, but then we sort of look down on people who are asking for help, but yet we should be asking for help. Like, this is something we should be doing. And it's a trust factor. And I think that to open yourself up is so much better. So then once I did that, I started finding people who would also open up. And those were the people that I started going to for help. You know, okay, how do I do this? And how do I approach this? And how do I talk to so-and-so about this? And it's just, that's how you have to live. You know, I mean, my life now is so much richer, and I know who I can totally trust, and I know who I can somewhat trust, and I know who to stay away from, because I know they kill my joy. You know, they beat down my love for what I'm doing. So yeah, I think it's opening up and being vulnerable. I think that's what does it. And then it makes you see so much more. And then you can be that way with your students too.
That is amazing. And it's amazing for a lot of reasons. One, because I think all of us at some point have felt afraid to be open and say, I need help. In fact, for me, I was afraid to say anything to anybody for probably 2 straight years that I needed help. My first year, I closed the door and I prayed nobody knew. I had no clue.
Yeah.
I mean, I did. I knew more than like I say, I had no idea what I was doing, and I did have some idea what I was doing, but I was nowhere near good enough for what the group of kids they had given me needed. And I needed help. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to tell anybody. Uh-huh. Because you're afraid that people will think that you shouldn't have been hired. You shouldn't have, that fear of letting people know that you're not quite good enough is overwhelming and very limiting. But once you are able to say, I need help, I don't know everything, I don't have all the answers, it's a very liberating feeling, because then you know that there are people there who are willing to work with you to help you and they may not have all the answers either, but at least it's somebody who can help you try to find them.
Right. And they keep that discussion going. Yeah. And you know you're not alone.
Exactly. And I think especially in the world today, all of us need to know that we're not alone.
Right.
Because being alone is very difficult. Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I like my alone time, but the feeling of isolation, of being like alone where no one can help you is really hard to do.
Oh my gosh, it's overwhelming.
And so, I don't see that skill in teachers as they come into the profession of, this is how you build connections with people in your building, in your class, like on your team, outside of your team, in your building, in your school district. This is how you start to find the people that you really need, the people that work for you.
Yeah, your tribe.
And so to find those people and keep them in your life, keep them around, hang on to them. Like, even if you're in a different school or in a different state or in a different country, you don't have to let those people go.
Right.
once you found someone who's good and helps you with your life, don't let them walk away. So yeah, I just that's really good advice for anybody, not just people who are new into the profession, but anybody in the profession. I mean, you said that it's one of those things you found much later in your career and changed things a lot for you. And I think that's a really inspiring piece for anybody who's teaching, is that there's never a time when it's too late to open yourself up, to trust, to find good people, to bring them into your life. And yeah, sometimes you're going to make the wrong decision and trust somebody that maybe you shouldn't have. But as you do it more, you're going to get to know the types of people that you can trust and the people you want to have in your life. Uh-huh. And that's a beautiful way to really work and live.
And some of those people I've realized I really can't trust are the people who themselves don't ask for help and don't trust others right now. And maybe they will someday, but it's a mindset. Like, I mean, he was so worried that I was going to get hurt. And I think he must've gotten hurt at some point and said, you know what, I'm not trusting anybody again. And he's like, you shouldn't tell people at work that. Don't tell people at work that. I'm like, what? And I did, I started off innocent and I'm going to do it. But then I shut down, but then I was able to open up again. So yeah, it's good. I'm glad you asked that question. I'll have to tell my husband about it tomorrow.
It's such a, yeah. So he's asleep too. That's what,
no, he's not here yet. He's going.
Yeah. And that's just normally I ask what advice you would give to somebody, but I can't think of a better piece of advice to give to people in education in any field, really, than to be okay, to trust others.
Yeah. And ask for help. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I try to talk to people, especially with kids, about, and one of the things I've learned a lot with working with middle school kids, is people say, well, how do you build trust? I said, well, you start by giving trust. Mm-hmm. If you give people the trust, if you show them that you trust them, they are much more likely to trust you back.
Right.
And it's not one of those things where you're like, oh, well, we both mutually have decided to trust each other at the exact same time. No, you start out, if you want someone to trust, you give them something to trust you with. You give them some bit of trust, and opening yourself up to that is a little bit scary, but at the same time, so worth it. Yeah. With kids and with teachers. And I think that's a great message for people to hear. So I think that will be a great place for us to stop in terms of your journey, although there's so much more, I'm sure, to hear about. Right.
It's fun to go back like that.
It is, and it's so interesting to me every time I talk to a new teacher, a new educator, about where they came from and how they got to where they are. There's some really interesting parallels and some really similar pieces to the puzzle, but at the same time, each one has unique characteristics that are interesting and give you some insight into how they became who they are. And so it's really very interesting. Like, I love doing this just because I get to learn about people, and I get to learn the connections between their stories and the things that they do now. And it's always very it's always something new and something interesting to me to hear how people have grown and changed, and how their experiences have led to where they are. So speaking of things that have led to where Joy is now, is Joy is still doing amazing things in her classroom. She has her live binders. She's making faces at me because I said she's doing amazing things in her classroom.
Not this week. No.
Not this week.
Park tests are next week. Come on. Next
oh, boy.
Week.
Yeah, I know. I spent half the week with kids making augmented reality, and the other half them doing park testing stuff. So, like sometimes it's cool, and sometimes we do this. But hey, it happens. But aside from doing these great things in the classroom, or sometimes other things that have to be done, Joy has a really great book out called Shift This. If you want to make changes in anything that you're doing in the classroom, in your school district, in your own practice. It is a really great book. It's very easy to read. It's very easy to follow through and reflect using the setup that she's put together. And it is even if you are further advanced in your career and you think to yourself, I've made a lot of changes, it's such a great reflection tool to go back through and read. So it is a wonderful book, a great read, and a great way to go back and think about where you are and where you want to go in your career. So I highly recommend it to anybody who reads and can read and is interested in getting better and making themselves better in their career and just in life in general, to reflect on where you are and move forward. So Joy's book, Shift This, is available just about anywhere you can buy books. And
make sure it's not from that weird party seller. Like, make sure it's on Amazon, because now there are pirated copies.
Yeah.
I'm getting like 1-star reviews because the pages are out of order. Well, that's not from Dave Burgess. It's from...
That's bizarre.
Yeah.
I saw that and I said, that's so weird.
And they'll make up for it. Like, Dave Burgess will make up for it. They'll send you a new one. Just get it from Amazon, not from those third-party Amazon people.
Yeah, that's so weird. Maybe someday someone will think my book is good enough to rip off and make third-party copies.
Is that a compliment or not? I don't think so.
It comes with like a half-colored cover that's made with construction paper and photocopied pages with the black ink marks along the side.
But thanks for the shout out. I hope the real copies are good.
I got the digital copy.
Good. There you go.
It was, the pages were in order. Good. I read them in order for the most part, and but yeah, it's a great read. So I can't thank you enough for sharing, for being vulnerable, for being personal, for sharing your story and giving everybody some insight into where you've been and how you view your work and what you do, and some great lessons and great advice for people at any point in their career. So absolutely wonderful to have you with us, and thank you so much once again.
And thank you, Brian. It was a great trip. Thank you.
I just want to thank Joy Kirr once again for being my guest on the Teacher's Journey tonight. I've learned a lot from her. She has wonderful perspective as an excellent educator. You can find her on Twitter, find great resources from her on Live Binders, and check out her book Shift This on anywhere books are sold. Please do remember to subscribe to the podcast, enjoy the podcast on Spreaker, iTunes, or SoundCloud, and rate the podcast if you're enjoying it. Catch you all on the next journey.